Everyone, to this next session of the day, brought to us by Andrew Luthwaite from Avolution. Avolution are one of our sponsors today, so a big thank you to them for joining us again and for supporting the event. Andrew, if you could just turn on your video and your sound.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, wonderful. So a big thank you to everyone for joining this session, and to Andrew for speaking. The stage is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Philip. Thanks everyone for joining. I was just saying to Philip, then there's been some really good sessions today. So hopefully the same will continue. It's actually good to see, I guess, some familiar faces as well. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so it's good to be back and showcasing, I guess, some aspects around EA. And obviously, as tool vendors, it's obviously great to be here. I'm going to start actually just with a quick story, really, just to emphasize what we're going to be going through today. But one of the things that I'd like you to try and imagine, especially for this type of presentation, is if you were trying to build, for example, a dream house, let's say, and you're hiring the best contractors, the plumbers are installing pipes, the electricians are storing the right wires, you really end up with a well-functioning house. But what potentially happens is it becomes some kind of chaotic structure behind the scenes. That's probably quite a costly mistake to be making. And that risk from a business perspective is exactly what happens when we see organizations that don't have some kind of shared map of capabilities, some kind of business capability blueprint, if you like, that really helps standardize on those and then really empowers digital transformation throughout that organization. So that story really is hopefully going to be a good analogy of the types of content that we want to go through today. Before that, worthwhile giving a quick intro. So I'm Andrew Luthwaite. I'm the pre-sales lead as part of the Avolution team, and we provide effectively a leading enterprise architecture tool. We do this across different industries. So we help organizations with different use cases. This could be cloud migration efforts, technical debt scores, application portfolio management, and of course, like we're talking about today, capability modeling. And really what we're trying to do is make sure that not just enterprise architects, but anyone in the organization who needs to access content can do that quickly and efficiently and access the relevant data at the appropriate time as well. So you'll see here different industries we work across. I'm well aware the track is beyond frameworks, but let's just reference the frameworks because they are going to be useful, and it's certainly something we'll touch on briefly today as well. So what are capabilities? And I'm very well aware of the trickiness of trying to define capabilities, but we'll do our best today and not tread on too many toes. But really what we're trying to do is explain essentially three areas of an organization. So why does a business exist? What structures do they have in place to support the why? And the how really is how do these structures interact with each other to kind of deliver that why through the what? If we kind of translate those, admittedly, maybe crudely into topics, if you like, or domains, we'd think the why is the vision and strategy. The what is really more of the business capability architecture. And then the how is really the processes and technologies that support that business capability. Okay. So when we talk about standardizing, really what we're thinking of is a standard being some level of quality, hopefully a high level of quality, and a capability being the ability or the power to do something. So again, if we translate that back into a business definition, a business capability really exists as the ability to achieve a specific goal. And the idea of standardizing on that means we're trying to achieve specific levels of quality across those goals using processes, technology, and data. Now, a business unit could just be a cluster of capabilities. That on its own really has no function, but it's really the capabilities of the processes and technology that support that really translates into being a business capability. The more, let's say, concrete analogy that you'll see are things like the US Marines have a capability to get boots on the ground in 24 hours. It says nothing about how they do that. They just have that capability, and that could be done in many different ways. A different analogy, maybe you can tell we're going through some kind of home renovations with the building analogies here. But it's the same idea. If you have different things like power tools, you have kind of different batteries and chargers and brands. You're trying to find all of these different bits to fit together. And really what that means is it causes delays. And it is really, of course, very inefficient to operate that way. From business context, again, that means we can speed up operations by standardizing on capabilities. We can reduce the amount of errors that we might come across. And we want to make that as easy as possible for everyone to access as well. Now, there are a few areas that we've seen organizations use capabilities to drive specific goals and objectives. And really, it's a great place to start to essentially build buy-in across the organization. If you have some kind of common reference model that everyone can relate to, it makes it much easier to provide some visibility across the organization. It also becomes much easier then to start linking those capabilities to things like applications, processes, technologies, to understand where the underlying infrastructure lies as well. For those of you who've used capability models, specifically across industries, I guess, you might have come across things like BION. So this is a very specific service landscape or capability model for financial institutions. We have things like PCF models. So these are typically process classification frameworks from bodies like APQC. And they also have generic ones and industry-specific ones as well. And then, of course, things like BizBook, again, has some really great levels of capability modeling and arguably its own kind of business framework as well. If you haven't heard of these before, I'd indulge you to kind of look into these, especially the APQC one, which has a broader scope, I guess, for different industries you're working in. They really can help accelerate some of the models that you want to be building. And of course, if you want to reach out to us to get a bit more information on how we support these, feel free to do so as well. So there are four main areas that I really want to cover in terms of the values and the benefits that standardizing on business capabilities bring to an organization. And this first one is around improving efficiency and consistency. So when we think of these standardized capability models, specifically, I guess, from a tool perspective as well, we're trying to build this single source of truth where everyone has the same definition of the capabilities. And that ideally then is aligned to some kind of EA framework potentially. So you can see we've mentioned things like TOGAF and BizBook in here. Of course, it's agnostic of frameworks. Capability models exist in isolation as well. But the benefit is combining those with other areas on different domains as well. Another key area that it can help is around automation. So really trying to automate repetitive tasks that you're performing. We can see those through standardizing on capabilities. That saves architects a lot of time. And then it also reduces a lot of the manual effort, especially if you're onboarding new teams. There is a shared model that they can review and contribute to. And they then can understand what parts of the organization need to speak to if they're delivering and deploying new services aligned to those capabilities as well. And finally, it helps with a lot of the collaboration side of things. So trying to encourage more regular communication through kind of individual boards where the EA team are involved, maybe governance committees where you can help evolve those capabilities. Initially we might deploy some kind of standard or reference, but that will evolve over time, either new capabilities or capabilities phasing out. That's really the idea of having a collaborative area where everyone can work on those at the same time as well. The second value or benefit really is how we can enable more kind of rapid integrations of technologies. There's been a few sessions today on kind of aspects around AI and different technologies that are coming to fruition. Capabilities, again, are going to hopefully drive some of the standardization across that, especially if you can see through those reference architectures, some of those emerging technologies come into play and certain parts of the organization are already deploying them and they're contributing to a capability, then other teams can come in and see how they're functioning, see how they're using those technologies, and hopefully reuse those across their models as well. That's quite useful for kind of standardizing on APIs as well, when we think of technical capabilities, really trying to onboard those technologies becomes much easier. And this is hopefully the point we're making here as well. So we kind of reduce the complexity that's required to support those new technologies if we know how they're going to be used, or if we can see how they're being used already across different teams. And finally, maybe more specifically from a tooling perspective, once we have that information, when other teams come on board to develop their new processes or application integration views or solution views, they can start reusing that content. We can start reusing versioned content and patterns that we're building within the tool. And that just makes it much easier to implement anything new that gets created. So in the world of kind of more agile practices being deployed, where we can kind of plug and play and kind of test emerging technology really quickly, capability models provide a good standard base for working from that view as well. Now, thirdly, streamlining in operations, I think, is something that we've seen that's quite effective, I'd say specifically from a tooling kind of view, if you like. Now, one of the main reasons for this, if we take an example capability model, what we first want to try and do is highlight specific metrics, attributes, properties that really describe those capabilities. We can do that through things like maturity scores. We might want to do that through things like cost or time to completion. These metrics become fundamental for understanding where we can make changes. So if we were modeling things like processes underneath those capabilities, time to complete, manual versus automated, from an application perspective, we're thinking of criticalities and recommendations. These can all aggregate back up to that capability level. So if we have certain operating capabilities that are supported by different applications and processes, we can start reusing those across other views that we're building. Also think of, as I've mentioned previously, capabilities as being dynamic. So they will change over time. Um, Arguably, it becomes the more stable part of the organization. So the what, I guess, rarely changes so much without kind of market shifts. But the how, in terms of the applications and technologies and processes, are susceptible to quicker changes. So if anything, in the world of kind of quicker changes and more changes and faster pace, um, capabilities can kind of be relied on to be a bit more stable. And then you can build off that as a base. We'd also encourage the use of external tools. So if we're modeling things like processes, so business process architectures, if we're going through specific initiatives around developing and changing those, we can start plugging in data from other areas. So linking to automation tools, building governance documents around that, and centralizing that is all things that we'd usually support. Agnostic of other tools you're using, how we build the best platform to standardize on these things and really cultivate a bit more of a kind of a continuous improvement mindset. That's both, I guess, from the implementations that we want to build, and certainly what we've seen through people standardizing on content as well. The final point from a benefit or let's say key aspect of standardizing capabilities is around how we can look at risk management and compliance. We've done various pieces of work and case studies that you can look at from different industries, whether it was kind of agnostic of industry through things like GDPR, banking regulation industries changing through things like MiFID II and the DORA regulations coming for financial institutions. Capabilities can again act as a good base for that. So those compliance checks on each of those capabilities, heat mapped and using tools to flag where things are non-compliant, again, just makes it so much easier to make those changes and align to those new regulations that are coming into play as well. From an EA's perspective, what I'd usually recommend is building some kind of dashboard or collection of visualizations of that information. So risk could both be business or technical. We can kind of split that off even further into kind of cybersecurity risks and things like that. But again, if we can heat map those, we can allocate where those vulnerabilities are. That really allows us to kind of stay ahead of the regulations that come into play. Also very helpful when it comes to auditing perspectives. If you have a clear map of where those vulnerabilities lie, and you have traceability from business capability to process to app to technology, that's a much easier way to visualize things than sometimes coming from bottom up. So there are benefits to both, but sometimes it's a bit easier coming that way and trying to get that business view on top of the technology view first. And then finally, I guess once we have that model in place, really what we're trying to emphasize is how enterprise architects can really be consistent across that model. So if I take something like a cybersecurity framework like NIST, there are various controls and vulnerabilities that NIST can apply to an application portfolio. And then we can aggregate that up from a business risk perspective to the capability world. The reason that's important is, a list of 1,000 apps for certain stakeholders isn't really what they want to be looking at. They want to see a consolidated view, an aggregated view at that capability level that they're interested in. So providing a high level view first, then that ability to drill down just makes it so much easier to track those changes and monitor those changes as well. Now, there's a few different ways that we might advocate building these types of views. But just as a quick glance as to the types of stuff you could be doing, you might be building things like value chain diagrams, so understanding where each capability and process is aligned to a value stream. You might be building kind of one-pager capability maps, looking at the heat map areas around maturity or cost. Or what we'd usually maybe recommend is really just having a combination of these views through a dashboard where you can kind of collect and collaborate and really allow everyone to contribute to these data sets as well. So as takeaways, I would say that the thing to really think about when we say standardize capabilities to empower digital transformation is from an EA tooling perspective, it really is, the digital twin of an organization. We'll probably hear that, a lot more this year. But the idea is that those maps provide consistency across any domain. Application architects can review and map to those capabilities. Data teams and process teams can do that as well. And stakeholders can come in and see the impact that that capability is having across the organization. So having that visibility to drive quicker integrations and innovation is one thing. But from an operational perspective, you can start adhering to better regulations and compliance metrics and really trying to make things much more efficient as well. There's one more thing I will say, though, is, well, two actually, I guess. We talk about standardizing capabilities as good practice. Um, Arguably, there are nuances and caveats to this. So the phrase I came across, which I quite like, is commonality at the core, but diversity at the edge. So if we can have a core capability model that's aligned across group and regional levels, that's a great thing. But inevitably admit and kind of, I guess, accept that there will be diverse capabilities at those edge use cases where there are specific systems and processes that need to be developed. And in particular regions, there may be unique capabilities that need to be developed. So commonality at the core, but diversity at the edge is a great way of thinking about standardizing on some of these things. As a call to action as well, I guess one of the good things is if you went away and kind of pick one critical capability in your organization, map out those processes, data, and systems supporting it, and really just see where that leads. I think that's a really good exercise to pick one thing, see where those changes can be made. And once you do that, reach out and we can give you a bit more advice on where we take that into the next steps as well. I always realize on these sessions that time does fly by, but I believe we should have time for questions. So what I'll do is I'll open this back up just so I can see those coming in, and we'll work our way through over the next few minutes. So let's just take a quick look. So we have, so how can we manage capabilities when we have a group capability model and then separate regional differences? Yep. So I guess similar to the concept there where we have a group level capability model, that should be the standard or reference model. regional differences will then exist either in different teams or geographic regions. And the idea is that you would want to maintain a reference and then compare back to see where those regional differences are. That could also be within the same teams. So you may have situations where certain teams have their own view of a capability. Certain teams maybe have better maturity across those or better processes and applications that support them. So having a tool that can manage both situations, a reference model, and then regional differences is important. And I think capturing that into enough level of detail where you can actually make that comparison is going to be useful, because then you can at least try to adopt those. Either the regions become more compliant with the reference model, or at times, which we've seen, that group capability models changed based on the regional differences that have happened underneath as well. So there's a few different areas that's worth considering, I guess, when we think of group and regional differences in that sense. So there's another question here I'll go for first. So from your experience, who should be responsible for the business capabilities, IT or business? Yeah, it's a good question. And I've been at Avolution for over 11 years now, and it's certainly always split the room as to who wants to take that responsibility. I think quite often we're engaging with teams more often than not from the IT domain. And what we're trying to do is explain the value that modeling business capabilities can have to them as well. So in terms of who should be responsible for business capabilities, the business who are setting strategic goals and objectives and understanding what capabilities exist, I think should sit within that business team. The IT team should be aware and use those capabilities when they're delivering or building solutions. So I think there's sometimes a fine line there, depending on the size of your EA team or who's involved. But the business being part of that decision and responsible for that is always something that we found quite useful. And the IT team being aware and contributing is a great way of getting that alignment. So if ever you feel like there's a separation between business and IT, quite often capabilities can kind of bring that together. In the perfect world, which I'm well aware we're not in, but it can certainly help in most situations. And then there's another question. So is there a way a tool can help calculate capability attributes like maturity? So yes, there's various ways that you might want to do this. There are specific kind of Gartner formulas. We have our own algorithms and formulas that you can use. Maturity scores can vary from kind of low, medium, high to kind of standard ones around, maintaining and optimizing, for example. You could take a direct approach of just scoring the capability or taking a survey-based approach, or you can take a slightly more indirect approach, which is if those capabilities have relationships across the model, then you can start seeing what they're connected to, which processes, applications, and technologies, and we can infer the capabilities maturity through those relationships. So there's various ways that you might want to do that. We can provide some best practices. Frameworks also provide good practices and methods for this as well. So if you ever wanted a bit more information on how that can be done, I would just quickly say, reach out. We can help you with that. And again, we can give you some guidance on how best to score those things as well. I believe I'm at time. So what I will do is maybe just a quick thank you to everyone again for joining. Hopefully today's been useful. Of course, all these sessions are recorded, which is incredibly useful because you can look back at these sessions and dive into more detail. If you'd like more information on, of course, Abacus, what we do, how we help organizations, feel free to reach out directly, indirectly through the website, and we'll be more than happy to set up a session for you. But thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Philip and the team, for setting up another great event.